Hi, hello everyone. Very happy to be here. It was a great introduction, so I think we can directly delve into the thick of it. So this session will be an introduction to LLM boost training. We're going to see like all the major stages, and by the end of the presentation, I hope that you have a really good understanding of everything that is involved to boost train the model. So there was already an introduction, so I'm not going to repeat that. And we can delve directly into what boost training really is. So here you have a diagram with the LLM training lifecycle. There are three main stages. And the first one is pre-training that produces a base model. The base model is trained on a lot of raw text, and the main task is to autocomplete the prompt. So the model is good for knowledge. It's good for auto-completing questions, but it's not very good at answering the questions. So to answer the questions, we go through a round of supervised fine-tuning to create an instruct model that is able to follow instructions. So here in the dataset, we have questions and answers, and we train the models to produce the answers based on the context of the questions. This is good, but we can even get it better with higher performance by aligning it with what humans like. So here, this is the preference alignment stage where we are going to show the model's preferences. It can be chosen answers, rejected answers, and this time we're going to optimize the model to produce the chosen answers. So it's more optimized for what humans prefer to see. And this makes the models more helpful too, and it can be used to also remove some possible answers to make sure that they do not go talk about topics that you don't want them to talk about. So in this sense, we see three different ways of fine-tuning a model. So this is what I mentioned about supervised fine-tuning and also preference optimization. And in these three categories, we have a different data budget, I would say. So if you want to create general purpose models, like when you talk to ChatGPT, for example, you typically want a lot of samples, like over 1 million samples, because what you're trying to achieve here is to produce a model that is good at pretty much everything, you know. But you can have other categories of fine tuning where you want to be good at a narrow topic. It can be domain specific, like medical LLM, like learning or getting better at a language. And here you typically require fewer samples between 100K and 1 million. And you can also go even narrower with task-specific models. For example, you can have a model that achieves one precise functions like spell checker. And in this case, you typically require even fewer samples. Note that all of these figures, they really depend on the size of the models. They really depend on the pre-training data. That depend on a lot of factors. It's more to give you like a good start on how to think about the data budget, but by no means those are actual like final figures. The most important slide maybe in this entire presentation is about when to use fine-tuning. I think this is the main issue we have with projects that try to implement fine-tuning. The issue is not like the training algorithms. It's mostly about how it is used, and sometimes it's used in a way that doesn't necessarily make sense. So I would say always start with in-context learning. If it's not good enough, you can go for RAG, and this time you're going to query your documents and add it to the context. And if it's not enough, if you need more performance in some way, then fine-tuning can make sense. And here we use fine-tuning in some precise context to change the tone or the format of the answer. For example, I mentioned the spell checker. Maybe you don't need to have a spell checker acting like a chatbot. You may have a more structured answer. And this is useful to do with fine-tuning because it's very good at learning specific formats, specific structures in your outputs. Then you can add superficial knowledge. So here I mentioned superficial because I want to emphasize the fact that you will not be able to learn an entire new language with fine-tuning. Learning a new language requires something like 100 billion tokens. And here we're not even working with 1 billion tokens. So we don't have enough samples to do this. But you can definitely teach superficial knowledge about your company, about yourself, about a product, this is the right stage to do it. And then you can even augment it with RAG. You can augment it with in-context learning to make it even better, but fine-tuning can help here. And finally, there are other considerations regarding reducing cost, reducing latency. So if you use cloud models, you might want to do everything local because it's often a lot cheaper. And you can also increase the quality of the output of the model by doing offline distillation from a bigger model, typically GPT-4o, Claude, or another one. And then when you've done all that, it's very important to evaluate the results to compare it against other versions of the model, compare it against other solutions, not only in terms of quality, but also in terms of inference speed, in terms of latency, and everything that matters for your precise use case. Let's now talk about dataset creation. So the main question when we talk about dataset is, what is a good dataset? What is a good sample? I like to think about it according to three main dimensions. The first one is accuracy. You want to have samples, answers that are accurate, that really answer the questions, they are relevant, and they provide the right answer. But this is not enough, because if you have accurate questions for like the same or very similar topics, it will not cover every potential use cases that might arise when you users interact with your models, which is why diversity is very important. You want to cover a lot of topics to make sure that you rarely fall out of distribution. And that also helps the model to generalize better. So it's also better for the model to remember the knowledge that you distilled. And finally, there's complexity. Complexity is about forcing the model to learn things that are not trivial, really forcing it to reason a bit and not just teach it answers that it already knows. Then after that, there are data formats. So we talked about instruction datasets and also preference datasets. So this is how they're structured in practice. You have a system prompt, an instruction prompt, and an output. So the system is something to steer the model. We all know that. The instruction is the user query in this case. And finally, there's the output. So you see here with instruction data, we have only a single output. And typically, we're going to mask the rest during training and only train on the output. The preference data, this is a bit different because this time we have the chosen answer and the rejected answer. And the goal will be to force the model, teach it to output answers that are more like the chosen answer and less like the rejected answer. Here you see a typical data generation pipeline. It's very flexible and you can adapt it to a lot of use cases. So we start with seed data. It can be anything. In my book, the LLM Engineer's Handbook, we just scraped articles from the internet that my co-author and I wrote. Then we go through instruction and answer generation. So here you can use another model to rewrite these articles to produce questions and then answers to the same questions. Then you have a step about scoring and filtering this data, because during the data generation process, things can go poorly. You can get like really bad answers, some things that are really not relevant at all. So here you can use heuristics or an LLM as a judge to review the quality of the answers and only keep the best ones. And then there are more typical steps like data identification, decontamination, and finally filtering, for example, to remove answers that are way too long. An example of this is to create an instruction following dataset. So here we're going to have prompts and also constraints. Instruction following is, like in this example, really about following constraints that the users put in the query. Then we're going to ask an LLM to generate answers. We're going to run test to make sure that the constraints have been respected, have been followed. And finally, we can do decontamination with IF-eval, which is a very popular instruction following dataset. And we can do some keyword exclusion if we do not want the model to mention something. Another example is for preference datasets. So here we need chosen answers and rejected answers. How do we do that? The answer is simple. We're just going to query multiple LLMs. We're going to throw the answers into a judge LLM that is going to assign a score to it. And we're going to keep the best answer as the chosen answer and the worst answer as the rejected answer. Now that you have done that and you have a lot of small data sets, you want to merge them into a single unified instruction data set. So a way to do this is through this example. This is Open Perfect Blend, a data set that I made on Hugging Face. And this is a reproduction of a paper called The Perfect Blend, Redefining RLHF with Mixture of Judges. And here you see that you can play with the categories of the samples, more math, more code, less chat maybe. It depends really on the use case that you want to have. And on the right, you can see like all the data set that I've used to create this one. Finally, let's talk about chat templates. There are a lot of chat templates. I want to mention that there are storage formats. So here we saw system instruction output. This is a storage format often referred to as Alpaca. And then what you're going to actually provide to the model is a version that has received a chat template. So you can see highlighted in yellow all the special tokens in the chat template. You have IM start to signify that, okay, we're going to start a new message. Then you have the role here, system, user assistant, and finally IM end to say this message has ended. So this allows you to really structure the way that the model sees the questions and the answers. And that's what it really learns during supervised fine-tuning. Now let's delve into the training itself. So I would recommend 3 main libraries to perform fine-tuning. Those are TRL from Hugging Face. This is Axolotl, which is very popular in the fine-tuning community. And finally, Unsloth, that is super efficient, mostly if you have a single GPU setting. This is the one I would recommend. Then let's talk about SFT techniques. So there are 3 main ways to perform SFT. The main objective doesn't change. We still try to predict the next token, but we can do it in different ways. For example, you have full fine-tuning, which is about retraining all the parameters of the model. So this maximizes quality, but there are more efficient ways of doing it. For example, LoRa, where we're going to add LoRa adapters in each module of the model. So here we are going to freeze all the weights and only train these LoRa adapters. So instead of training 100% of the parameters, you're going to train less than 1% of them. So this makes it a lot more efficient, but you still need to load the entire model in FP16 precision, which costs a lot of VRAM, which is why we have QLoRa, where this time we're not going to load the model in full precision, but in 4-bit precision. So the quantized version of the model, it lowers the VRAM usage, but it also degrades performance a bit. So if you can not do it, I would always recommend using LoRa over QLoRa. But sometimes you just do not have the VRAM that's required. In this case, QLoRa can be a good option. But note that it is like 20-30% slower than LoRa, which is another good reason why you want to use LoRa if possible. Then we have preference alignment techniques. So I created a very long diagram to explain everything about the different algorithms with all the different blocks and model that we trained, but I thought it was too much. So here I want to focus on a very high level view, because I think that with reinforcement learning, you can go very, very deep, and this is not the crux of this presentation. So here I want to mention 3 main algorithms to do preference alignment or reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF. Those are DPO, PPO, and GRPO. DPO is excellent if you want to create a model that is good at chatting with a user, because what you're going to teach the model is a data set, a static data set of chosen answers and rejected answers. And this is great because it requires less computational resources, and it will give you 95% or more of the performance. So DPO, if you want to create a chatbot, it's excellent. And then you have PPO, and PPO is really good if you have a ton of compute. So this is an algorithm that was developed by OpenAI, and typically this is excellent if you have a lot of data and also a lot of GPUs, because you will need very large batch sizes to make it work. So the new contender in this algorithm space is GRPO, that was popularized by DeepSeek R1. And here you can have something that is not as computationally expensive as PPO and allows you to have multiple reward signals. So you can define different reward functions. And this is a new trend. It is really good. And I would recommend it if you want to make reasoning models that really need to output thinking tokens and that are required to do more complex tasks. But for the rest, I would recommend DPO because it's just a lot easier to use. Talking about training and details, here are a selection of the most important training parameters. I will not go over all of them in details, but I want to mention especially the learning rate, which is probably the most important training parameters. It really defines how much the parameters are going to be updated after each step. And so it has a massive impact on the training dynamics of your model. Then you have batch size and max length that really are about maximizing the hardware that you have, or the VRAM, the GPUs. So you want to try to maximize it as much as possible. Max length, you might want to have it high if you need very long answers or if you have very long inputs. Otherwise, you try to restrain it as much as possible because it also speeds up training. The number of epochs is obviously very important, and you want to typically have it between like 2, 3 to 5 epochs. It really depends on the use case once again. Finally, optimizer and attention mechanisms are really easier to select. You want AdamW for your optimizer, and you want to use flash attention 2 or 3 as the attention mechanism. So here is an example where the learning rate is too high on the left. You see that there's a loss spike. So when you monitor your training run, this is something that is pretty obvious. On the contrary, you want your loss to be smooth and slowly decreases, like on the right. So when you monitor experiment, you have the loss that is very important. It can be the training loss, it can be the evaluation loss if you have validation data sets. And you also have the gradient norm. You don't want to see too many spikes here. Let's now talk about evaluations. So evaluations is a critical topic that is often not the focus of most presentations and work in the LLM space, but it's really, really crucial. I want to mention 3 main evaluation categories. The first one is automated benchmarks. Automated benchmarks were popularized by the OpenLLM leaderboard, like evaluations like MMLU, and you just calculate a metric based on the generated answers compared to ground truth answers. So this is very good because it's consistent, it's reproducible, it can be very scalable too, and it's very clear. For example, MMLU, it's about knowledge, and you can see like subcategories inside of the data set to see, okay, how good it is at math, at biology, at physics, etc. The problem with these evaluations is that it's not how we use models in real life. If you chat with ChatGPT, you don't really care about like the MMLU score, you just want good answers. And this is why it's also difficult to evaluate complex tasks because these evaluations are more limited and have a narrow focus. And finally, there's a huge risk of data contamination because the datasets, the evaluation datasets, are usually available online. You can also have more focused benchmarks, like more task-specific or domain-specific if you train a medical model or if you train a model for some enterprise scenarios, for example, that good leaderboards about it on Hugging Face. Then you have human judges. So this is what we do when we use the chatbot arena, LMC's chatbot arena. You can vote for one answer or the other answer. And here it's very useful because this is actually how models are used. You will really evaluate if the answer is useful or not to your problem. It's very flexible because you can also ask humans to do pretty much anything. You can ask them to review the toxicity of the answer and not just the quality, for example. And it provides direct human preferences. So it's also good if you want to train on this because this can also feed your DPO training. But this is very costly. This is very time consuming. Humans are also massively biased. So we say that LLMs are biased, but humans are probably not that much better. And in terms of scalability, you also require a lot of users to do it. So it's also very difficult. And what I want to highlight is that human preferences are actually weakly correlated with automated benchmarks. You can see the first row is the ARENA ELO. So those are scores that are directly provided by humans, and they are weakly correlated with the other automated benchmarks like MMLU that you can see here, or even worse with like human eval or math. MMLU is actually a pretty good one. But it shows that those two approaches are not orthogonal. You should combine them and make models that are good at both and not just at one. So another approach is to use judge LLM, where we replace humans with other judge models. And this is very good for scalability because now you don't need that many users. You can just scale and have a jury of models to do it. And by having a jury of models, you can also kind of correct some of the biases of each model. And finally, you can create your own evaluations. So I would say to start very early in your project. You should define the evaluations when you define the data that is used for training. You should try to combine different types of evals if possible. As I mentioned, automated benchmarks are not enough. Having like human or judge LLM benchmarks is not enough either. So you might want to reconcile and make something, a harness that is more holistic. And finally, you want to compare your models with others. You really want to challenge your solution against other solutions to see where you can improve. And this often unlocks like a lot of creativity and also a lot of performance in the solution that you build with a very fine-tuned evaluation framework. All right, that's it for me. So as a conclusion, I think that we saw the three main stages of post-training. We talked about dataset generation, and then we saw different algorithms for fine-tuning. We talked about supervised fine-tuning, preference alignment. And finally, we talked about evaluations with automated benchmarks, human benchmarks, and finally, LLM as a judge. So I think the goal here is really to see it as a loop and not just as a one-off process. You want to get the feedback signal from the evaluation and use it to make better data, more data, fine-tune more models, and evaluate it again. So this is the loop that allows you to iteratively get better and better at a problem and finally ship the model that you want to ship. So if you're interested in this, I have released a book with my co-author called the LLM Engineer's Handbook. And this is exactly the kind of stuff that we mentioned in this book. Thanks, everyone. Thanks a lot for the invitation and happy fine-tuning to everyone.